So then, good morning, friends, and welcome to today's talk. This will be coming to you via myself, and it is what I call a gamble through the sweets of the past. Some of them you will remember, and as a thing for later on, near the end, I would like you to actually say the sort of sweets that you remember from your childhood. But to start, do you know what Japanese straws, Dr. Jim's rifles, and Spanish juice are? No. How would you? These are licorice. These are one of the first sweets that people ate. Bits of licorice, the root itself, has been found, or was found, in Egyptian tombs. So it can be safely say that it's one of the first sweets that were ever produced. But the thing which I would like to start off with first is the thing which we would call the boiled sweet. This was virtually sugar. And this was sugar boiled, if you boil it up to 118 to 121% centigrade, you made things called caramels and butterscotch. It was of that type of heat. But if you heated it further up to 160, then the boiled sweet was as it was in those times. It became an enormous lump, which you would throw virtually onto a board or a hard surface. This hard surface was usually covered in stuff like lard, if you were poor, petroleum jelly, or olive oil if you had a little more money. And it was thrown about and bashed and done all types of things as it slowly cooled down. But they would have colorings and flavorings added. Colorings are an interesting one because you would use such things as boiled down spinach for the green. You'd put spinach and you'd choose the water, you'd put it with it, you'd have a green type of thing. You'd have also a red, which was made of beetles. It's called cochineal beetle, and it was crushed and it produced the red variety which we know of then. In a copy of the Lancet, which surprisingly enough was around at that time, they said that there were a few colors which should be very careful with. These were copper, a chromium type thing, mercury, and arsenic, which was used in colorings of those times. So you could see it was pretty dodgy stuff. But as I say, the amorphous lump, which you now had, you had to cut into bits. And you used oiled scissors to actually cut them. And this would produce flattened edges. And if you remember, you see even today in the jars, boiled sweets. This was one of the first sweets that were around at the time in very, very, very small sweet shops. Some of you remember the very small sweet shops of your youth. But also around that time, you had things like buttered Brazils and almonds. These were rather, the way to get them was that you had to have the whole nut. That means you had to employ sometimes people to crack the nuts and take them out of the shell and all this type of thing. And these are usually very, very poor people. And so you pay them piece rate for doing this type of thing. And occasionally they would nibble on your nuts. Because that was, the sort of food would supplement their extremely poor diet. The problem with this was that as it was done at the piece rate, you'd have the people there. And one story goes that one young lady didn't come for a few days to the factory where all these nuts were being produced. So a couple of her friends went round to her home, and she was found in her home quite dead. And she suffered from eating mostly almonds. But there you have sweet almonds, but you have also bitter almonds, which contained prussic acid. And she died of acid poisoning. Strange that, isn't it? But we go on. Ooh. If I were to mention Inkerman balls and Sebastio balls, I'm sure you know what era I am up to now. This is a Crimean War, and sweets were used as advertising, and buy these, they are for our brave lads at the front type of thing. It was that type of advertising. But can you imagine today's advertising for boiled sweets of today? A bag of SAS caramels, anyone? It is not only the soldiers who were affected by the wars of that time. The name William Maynard, which you will all remember, which you will think of at that time, who made the supremo of the wine gum manufacturing, became depressed about his son serving in South Africa and committed suicide. These are the type of, as I say, it's a gamble too. These are the type of things which interested me somewhat. Poor children before World War I made their own chewing gum by putting a mint leaf inside a chunk of candle wax. I never liked chewing gum and never used it personally, but my brothers and lots of friends, to them it was a big American thing. So of course it was the sort of thing you have. And I'd like to tell you about the really invention, the start of chewing gum from this little piece. This modern story starts in 1870 in Staten Island, where Mexican dictator General Antonio de Santa Anna, most famous for his attack on the Alamo, was living in exile. He chose to bring with him into exile an enormous lump of chicle. That is, my pronunciation is sometimes terrible, but that is C-H-I-C-L-E, chicle. This was that's a choice of the people in Latin America. But the lump was too satisfying any addiction. Santayana got it into his head that chiclet rubber property could be exploited in some way, although he wasn't sure how. Luckily, his landlord in America, Tom Adams, was also a would-be inventor. At his suggestion, they tried vulcanizing it in the hope to discover a new type of rubber. Nah, good. Theory number 2 was that the chiclet could be made a good setting for false teeth. And the gummy friend was even more persuaded to give it a try. His verdict is not recorded. After those somewhat fanciful explanations, Santayana gave up and moved on. Adams decided to try to sell the chiclet for its original purpose, chewing, and success came immediately. Eventually sold as New York's gum number 1. Snapping and stretching, it paved its way for Adams and his sons to become America's top gum company. Originally sold in balls, the gum evolved into shapes of a stubby pencil and eventually to the flat strips. In 1880, in a bid to prolong its freshness and chewiness, Frank and Henry Field hit on the idea of coating it in candy. And a mountain town in Venezuela exported so much of the raw material to the US that it became known as a city of chiclet millionaires. But the key date to remember is 1891, when the chewing gum messiah arrived in Chicago. Unlike the original messiah, William Wrigley Jr. was unaware of his desire. His father, the soap maker in Philadelphia, had given him a horse and a wagon and sent him west. His mission to get Wrigley's scouring soap better known, to pursue shopkeepers to stock it. William offered 3 packs of baking powder and chewing gum. Realizing how popular the gum was, he decided that the old man could sell his own soap, and chewing gum became Junior's future. Development of chewing gum. We now return to England, where this is a bit horrible. Paraffin wax was found to be mixed with the first originations of what we would now call chocolate, and was sold in lumps called chocolate clumps. And people would lick this and do other things with it. And it became a great thing for the poor. If you couldn't get boiled sweets or something like that, you would have this amorphous little lump which you would lick occasionally. Only till one child who'd had a lot of this died of a thing called peritonitis, because she ingressed a lot of this stuff within her gut. Thereafter, the government made a ruling. Clumps were banned from sale. I could go on for the rest of the hour about all the dreadful stuff that the confectionery in the past, but maybe that's for another day. there were thousands of factory workers which started to become a little industry which sold on to the little fruit and little shops that we know of in the past, you know, and that where am I? Here we go. But now we skip on to 1897, when the Quaker firms, like the Cadburys and the Frys and the Roundtrees and a few others, were developing their products into a halfway decent milk chocolate. Another one of that time. The first one of those that most people would know was Frys. They were the first ones in the market. They produced a chocolate bar called Five Boys. Before that, people preferred foreign chocolates, especially the Dutch, the Swiss, and the French. They came before England in producing the sort of chocolate which we would say originate as chocolate. As I say, Frys in that time produced Five Boys, closely followed by Cadburys. There's a book by one of the Cadbury family who produced all about the development of Cadbury's chocolates, which I'm sure most of us would know and some have read. But Cadbury's first sojourn into the market was a thing called Café au Lait, which was their answer to Frys, Five Boys type of things. But then Cadbury's produced something which is still on sale today and still sold in the millions, which they produced in 1905, which was the classic dairy milk. That was the first chocolate bar that we'd recognize as a chocolate bar eaten by, in that time, only the round about the middle and upper classes, because it was still a little too expensive for your working poor. But there was still slightly dodgy things happening. There was a toffee maker who made tins of toffees, which could be sold for birthdays, Christmas, and type of thing like that. And one man's job was to get all these tins and solder the tin to put the toffees in. The company he worked for was taken to court for health purposes, because one of their poor chaps who was soldering all the tins died from lead poisoning from the amount of soldering he done, you know, which you kind of think, 1916. There were sweets around those times because, as you can remember, of war times and all these type of things. You know, you had jumbled caramels, tally-ho mix, and Duchess chocolates. There was one toffee that came out around that time, which I'm afraid, due to that type of thing, failed. The toffee was euphemistically called Hindenburg toffees. Sadly, they didn't sell at all well. Well, this is my gamble through, and I am gambling through faster than I thought I was. So we now move on. In 1927, a relatively unknown toffee maker was at the theatre. He was a small chap of modest means, and he was sitting watching a play called The Bluebird of Happiness, and had a thought. He would design this toffee called Bluebird. Who hasn't heard of Bluebird today? They became a bestseller. And small things like that, to me, I thought was such a thing. It's kind of nearly the eureka moment type of thing. You know, many of you will know of that delightful thing of your youth and my youth and everybody else's. Who remembers the walnut whip? Yep. The thing about that, the concept of that is interesting, because before that you had the hazelnut whip, which was slightly smaller than the walnut type of thing. But they had a problem, the people who made this, because the nut inside it can be quite greasy through the nut itself. So how do you get that nut to stay there and not contaminate the rest of the chocolate? Large amounts of tests were done of this, and 98% of them failed, 99% of them failed, because they couldn't get it quite right. The nut would float off and stick to the top or the sides, and and start leaking oil and contaminate the chocolate. But they achieved this by coating the nut in a nearly insignificant amount of wax. It seals the nut into the chocolate. Then you pour the chocolate on it, and it produces your product. An interesting thought, but wax? Anyway. Right. 3, 4. Here we go. The commercialization of Easter began around the 1930s with the development of the chocolate egg. this was quite a revolutionary thing because it was quite thin. So you had to have your chocolate in a or liquid state, and you poured it over the blocks, the ovals, and this type of thing, and had to have to be able to get them apart and seal them back up again. And to many, you could only do this if you're a big organization like Cadburys or Fry's or something like that, because you had the equipment. And this is where sweet manufacturing became industrialized and left behind the manufacturers who before used to manufacture it in a shed in their back garden or at home on the kitchen table, or the very, very, very small manufacturer who would produce this type of stuff, and sometimes with nasty adulterations of the food that they were using. The kind of it is known for types of metals and sawdust and type of things would get into your sweets, which is not nice. And numbers of people were taken to court and thrown in prison for lots of nasty practices. So the introduction of the industrial method and a lot of government regulation meant that companies, as I said before, the Cadbury industry, and others were forced into doing this. Yeah. One of the things you will remember, and we all remember as today for Easter eggs, is Cadbury's cream egg, which was a big thing for them. It was they'd produce this little egg, as in your chicken could produce this type of thing, and small children were still amazed that their hens, which they had in the back garden, were producing these chocolate eggs. And also, not also that, but if you bit into them, they had a yellow yolk inside. It's to us, it's quite a simple thing, but to a lot of people, this was an amazing thing. As was, wow, look at that. But there you go. And you will also, as a child, I don't know if you did as a child, but we did as a family type of thing, would go on egg hunts. Eggs were, chocolate eggs were hidden around the garden, and people would go and look for them. My sisters were very good at that. At the time, though, as I say, these were a big thing at the time. At Easter, Rowntree issued a 16-page catalogue with all the different sort of eggs you could buy from them, from the tiniest little egg to really big, grand affairs, which were your thing, depending on how much money you had and how much you could produce, but some of these were kind of artistic events. You could have ones tied up with ribbon, you could have them in bows, you could have them decorated. They produced one which you have within a wooden box, and it had straw in it. Then your egg was presented in this and you can imagine this presenting this in the morning to your wife or your children or something like this, you know. So imagination took flight in a lot of cases. But one that they did that produced the ones that produced in the thousands, and it was just a brilliant idea from one person. They produced a plain chocolate egg that was sent, but in it they had a small tube of icing sugar, which you could decorate that egg. You could put your name on it. You could put "I love Fiona" or something on it. You could put whatever message you wanted to, and you could send it or give it to the person it was for, which sold in the millions. This was just one thought of one person, but you can imagine the sort of things you could do with it. Today, it would probably sell for something, and I still think it would be a good seller, but it stopped being sold. It stopped being sold a little while ago. But this is where I give you a tale of my own, and then I will pass it on to friends to actually say their ideas of youth or older age about sweets. I was in town, which had been about just after lockdown. I was wandering around a shop, and in a cellophane bag, I saw something I hadn't seen since I was, 10, 11? It was puffed rice, but the rice had color in it, lots of different colors, which they colored this rice with. And it took me right back, I said, to 10, 11 years old, when on my way to school with my brother, we used to stop off at a tiny shop. It really was one of these tiny sweet shops. And in a jar, you had this rice type of thing. And the lady, little old lady, used to sell me and my brother a paper cone with this rice in it. And I brought some of it and I sent it to my brother, and I said, "You remember this as well?" And he said yes, with great joy. And it's something I remember as, kind of right back to when I was a child. Now, I've left some time for actually friends' comments, amusements, and musings on sweets of your youth. Friends.
Thank you very much, Ray. I really enjoyed that. However, I was waiting in keen anticipation for mention of my favourite, which was the Seaside Rock. Did you find out anything about Seaside Rock?
No, I haven't got that far yet. That is, again, it's sugar and the colouring of sugar, and getting the name of your city inside the rock type of thing. Blackpool did it very well, and because it was a big industry there. People could be made today's version of billionaires by producing that and all the stuff which goes with it. Because how many friends remember, I used to call them snails, but they were kind of shells of marshmallow. I could see a couple of nods, yes. But yeah, seaside and sweets were always were well known. Yes, rock was one of those things.
I used to be a real pain carrying it back on the train. The very sticky stuff.
Yes, Harriet just said they're shrimps. That's the one. Graham.
You mentioned the use of nuts in sweets early on. When one buys a packet of whole Brazils or half walnuts, do you know how they are produced? We know individually, some of us at least, how difficult it is to get a Brazil nut out whole from its shell, and also a walnut, which is less than 20 different fragments. Are there millions of women in Brazil with knives hacking away at the whole nuts? Or is it done by machine? Be a very clever machine, I think, to do it.
Yes.
Does anybody know how whole nuts are produced other than by hand and underpaid workers?
Most of it is the answer to that is that the immediately is that most nuts nowadays are taken in a machine, but the nut itself is put into hot water and it softens the shell, so the machine can actually take them apart and use that. Jenny.
Well, I missed the beginning because I couldn't get in again, but I'm here now, so maybe I've solved it. But I was thinking about Gobstoppers. Did you cover them? We all ate them. But also I remember that at the end of the war, suddenly all around the village it went, there's sweets in the shops. And there was queues everywhere getting sweets after years and years of being rationed after the war.
Yeah, that's basically because sugar was was used differently then. Angela.
I have a very strong memory from 1950. I was 11, my little sister was 6. Food was rationed. Children were entitled to 2 ounces of sweeties a week. We were homeless, living in hut 506 Hoffield Common near Ashford, Kent. There was a main road, and the other side of the road was the only place that sold sweeties. So once a week, my mum would walk up to the big road, which we were not allowed to cross because it was busy. One bus went one way in the morning and back, and you might get 2 or 3 cars a day. So we were forbidden to cross the big road. So we would be taken with our mum would let us cross the road. We had to go to a special place where we could see both sides of the road to make sure it was clear, and she was teaching us how to cross the road safely, even though we weren't allowed to do it. We went across the road to the sweetie shop, which was someone's shed, I think, and they sold sweeties and other things. But what I always remember buying was dolly mixtures. And the reason was because they were rationed 2 ounces a week. I think you got about 10 or 20 dolly mixtures in your little, your little scoop of paper, so that I could actually plan how many of these little tiny sweeties I had each day, with leaving, if possible, a treat for the day before I was due to get my new packet of sweeties. So Dolly mixtures were, I don't know what, they were tiny little things, and it was a big ritual because I would choose my 10 or 20, and that took a lot of thinking about. My sister would choose her 10 or 20. That would take a lot of thinking about. We'd be talking about our choices. So it was a huge thing. Me 11, Ronnie 6, 1950. So thank you, Ray. You brought back a lot of memories for me. Thank you.
My pleasure. Graham.
One way of eating licorice was licorice all sorts.
Oh, yeah. Mm.
Varied in shape and size and colour, but always had some licorice in. The other way of eating licorice was to have a stick, and you dipped it in sherbet. What is sherbet?
The answer to that is I don't know. But yes, I remember the sherbet dabs type of things. Yeah, the little cardboard tube. Yeah.
Do you think it could have been bicarb of soda, because that fizzes, doesn't it? You had a mixture of bicarb of soda and sugar, or would it blow up?
Who knows?
Perhaps I'll try later on and see if I can make some.
Yes, it was. It was a strange time, because the sort of things we eat now and the sort of things that were started with were like, there you go. Harriet has produced it, Graham.
Thank you. It doesn't explode, then it just bubbles and fizzes.
But what, does it do any harm to your stomach, Harriet?
Yeah, I remember it was sherbet fountains were where the local sweet shop sold soda fountains, which we would take down to the beach. I seem to remember that the tubes, it came with a tube, and the tube was actually a licorice tube.
Yeah.
So to add to the fun.
That's a quote from one of the books which I referenced. Was he started with, what happened to Cadburys Aztec, Dobson's Moon Pebbles, Oggy Poggy Eyes, Dr. Smiles Bronchioles? Why do some people still think swallowing gum is fatal? Who thought up lines like, it's the honeycomb middle which weighs so little? Why are there fewer streets in your newsagent today than there were 20 years ago? It's a thought, isn't it? Like that putting honeycomb in a sweet, it was, but as a younger person, if you ever were in the countryside or something like this, honeycomb was something that you could eat on its own, but actually covering it in chocolate and selling it commercially was, again, one of these revolutionary things which people went, wow. Rosalind.
I don't know if anybody mentioned sweet cigarettes.
Oh, that was wicked.
That memory has dredged up from somewhere way back. But as kids, we thought we were really cool, pretending to smoke these sweet cigarettes, and the kind of white end with a little red bit at the far end. Yeah, they were really unusual. And one thing I loved was we lived in Dublin, and every summer we went to Northern Ireland to my mother's family. And one of my sisters and I, we stayed with this particular aunt and uncle, and we were so excited because we always got pocket money. And as we, we couldn't afford to be given pocket money at home, and we couldn't believe, you were given this amount of money, or sixpence, whatever it was, and you could just spend it on yourself, which was very exciting. But the lovely thing was that there were all sorts of different kind of sweets available in Ireland than we'd get at home. And we used to love, feel very excited, very privileged to be able to have all of these sweeties. I can't remember a lot of what I remember, little things like amount for your money as you could, so that things would last. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I used to love those sweet cigarettes, And it's quite true about feeling cool. I mean, so I at least learned how to hold a cigarette, to make it look, glamorous from those sweet cigarettes. Maybe those of us who had any bronchial problems as a result could nowadays be suing this.
Graham.
My grandmother during the war had an American GI billeted on her, so I had ready access to chewing gum and badges and so on. How he got the badges, I don't know, but I gave them away some time ago. But the chewing gum came in the normal little strips, and I remember cutting each one into 8 and saving each morsel of chewing gum and accumulating it as a tasteless lump in my mouth. I wonder, changing the subject, I wonder whether anybody else rather regrets the use of the name Quality Street for one of the corridors at Woodbrook. Quality Street, I think, was a Cadburys very successful product, but it's now manufactured by a firm owned by Nestle, who I think still have a pretty dodgy business record, which started, of course, with the baby milk scandal some 20 or more years ago. But it seems inappropriate, even at Woodbrook, that part of the accommodation area should be named after what is now the product of Nestle.
I can answer that question. It was called Quality Street because that was where the servants lived. So it's come down from the original house. So if you're putting Quality Street, you're putting the servants' quarters.
Thank you, that's interesting.
Yeah. So those are sort of sweets for the masses. Was that the thinking, do you think, in calling it quality?
No, just
Jenny.
Right, you've made me remember the first time I ever ate chewing gum. My mother worked for the Admiralty near Thatcham Station. They had lots of huts there where all the paperwork was, and their job was to put food onto ships. So she always knew when a ship had been hit and it had gone down, and they had to put all the stuff back. And on to the north side of that site were the Americans, and they had all their Nissen huts and everything there. So there was a big fence between it. As the war finished, they were pushing women back into the homes. They were trying to give jobs to men. So it was in a transfer stage. And one of the things they did was shut the nursery in the village, which my brother and I had been taken to after school to hold us until my mum finished work at 6. Anyway, she took us to work. And we ran round all these buildings on the outside. First time I'd ever seen a typewriter. But the Americans fed us chewing gum and sweets on the back fence between the two organisations. It was quite funny. I'd never had chewing gum. I'd never had anything like that. So we sort of felt it was Christmas.
Oh, that is.
David,
I'm just relaying here. Hattie's attempting to communicate in chat braille and has said, did you ever make your own crunchy? And what about the old pennies you spent? 4 blackjacks or fruit salad for a penny? If anybody's got any comment on that, great. But I'm also interested in more of the story of how Quakers got into chocolate and confectionery. What was that all about? Because it became a sort of, seemed to become a big thing for Quakers. I thought you might tell us more of that, Ray. But meanwhile, what did you do with your pocket money? What did you buy with your spare pennies?
me.
Yeah.
Oh, we were there were 7 of us in our family. So having money was only in for birthdays or for something like that, you know. And I would buy, as I say, the rice type of thing, or another one which I always remember because it was so different, was a thing called Sherbet lemons, which had a kind of a sweet shell type of thing with a fizzy thing inside it, you know, type of thing, you know. And that to me was, you know, just the as near as heaven as I ever got in that.
Yeah. No, we didn't have pocket money either.
So you got given sweets occasionally. Yeah, it was a secret indulgence, if you could have so much as to say in that type of thing, you know. And what about yourself, David? Are you a sweet person? In that sense, you know, I'm not stand by you and say hello, sweetie, but
I do remember sweet cigarettes, and I do remember sherbet fountains. So I must have bought them at there was a sweet store. We lived near the beach in Whitstable, and you had to take a diversion to go to the sweet shop. There was also a sweet shop at the top of the slopes that led down to the beach. So if you did have any money, it was very easy to dispose of it. The main activity when I was young was swimming, not eating sweets.
I lived in Swindon, which is about as far from the sea as you can get in this country. And so no, the sweet shop was in the position where the sea might well otherwise have been. But one didn't get to go there very often. I mean, I think mine was weekly as well. But I'm afraid I used to have 2 lots of sweetie rations because my cousin June, who was 13 years older than me and lived just up the road, June thought herself too grown up for sweets because she was training to be a lady, and so I got her a sweetie ration, which was brilliant. So I had tried 2 lots. It's probably the source of my lifetime struggle with my weight, actually.
But the thing which I tried to emphasize a little bit earlier was that the remarkable first developments of this industry and the nearly kind of the point where it became less a cottage industry and more an industrial thing that we know today. And in a lot of things, I think that is good, because the nasty things and the nasty stuff which used to go into sweets was shown to be bad for us. And the kind of, there are a few people today who kind of think that halcyon days when small sweet makers who is like, yeah, there were some who did well, but there were a whole bunch of them who were absolute rogues and were in it for making lots of money and didn't care what they produced, type of thing, So and so that type of thing, if you go back to those days, you still have, which has been developed over the years, is again the sweet shops of old. You can go to them, they've got the big jars with all the different types of sweets in them, which is a bit of a niche market, and I don't know how far they can survive, but some of them seems to have done. You could say so, Christopher.
Yeah, I was trying to remember in my childhood. I wasn't a great one for sweets. I saved up my pocket money, but I had a feeling that the sweets were actually open, in little trays on the counter. I mean, no, untouched by human hand, because the shopkeeper, all dealt with by human hand.
Yes, they used to put their hand out, didn't they, and gather up a handful of sweets and drop them into the paper bag.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Well, that's probably why we've all got reasonable immune systems.
It's quite a thought, isn't it?
Oh, but as someone said just earlier about the gobstopper thing, I must admit, and this is a shameful admittance here, friends, which I hope will not go any further. Gobstoppers, they were big. Yes. You could suck them for quite a long time. And as a small boy, for a while, I used to just put them in my trouser pockets, half sucked. Goodness know what happened to them after that type of thing. It's a bit horror for my mother. What have you been doing with your trousers, dear? Forgotten bit of gobstopper somewhere. Anyway, we have now reached the witching hour, friends. It was a pure joy for me to be able to share my musings with you, and you be able to share yours. And with trepidation, I would say, I will come back and do from 1930 onwards to 1980, 1990 for your delectation.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, friends, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.